I didn't begin this investigation intending to challenge centuries of accepted royal genealogy. Like many historians and researchers, I was following familiar paths: European royal marriages, alliances between great houses, the usual names that dominate history books: the Habsburgs, the Romanovs, the Tudors. On paper, these families appear meticulously documented, their bloodlines mapped with almost obsessive precision. At first glance, everything seems orderly. Official family trees present an unbroken chain: father to son, mother to daughter, marriages carefully arranged, alliances forged to preserve power. These genealogies are presented as finished products, clean, authoritative, beyond question. But as I traced them more closely, something subtle yet unsettling began to emerge. It wasn't a single error, not a missing document here or an unclear date there. It was a pattern. The deeper I looked, the more I noticed transitions that felt unnaturally smooth. Dynasties appeared fully formed. Lineages seemed to emerge already complete, as if written backward from a conclusion that had already been decided. Entire branches appeared suddenly important, then became unquestioned foundations of royal legitimacy. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The official trees show continuity. But continuity requires evidence at every step. What I found instead were gaps that shouldn't exist in the most documented families in human history. Not chaotic gaps caused by war or collapse, but strangely selective absences. Records would thin out precisely where they mattered most. That was when a deeper question surfaced. I began with a simple exercise. Take any major European royal family tree from the 18th or 19th century. Follow the maternal lines, the women who married into power. Ask a basic question: where did they come from before they entered these dynasties? The official explanation is always ready: minor nobility, distant cousins, princesses from obscure German principalities so small they barely appear on contemporary maps. On the surface, it sounds plausible. But when you try to trace these women's ancestry back just 2 or 3 generations, the documentation becomes remarkably sparse. Not incomplete. Sparse. As if their histories began at the moment they became useful. This is where the narrative starts to strain. European royal houses were famously obsessed with bloodline purity. They scrutinized ancestry, cataloged inheritance rights, and fought wars over succession claims. And yet, again and again, these same families accepted brides whose genealogical past could not be fully traced. No verification. No controversy. No debate. The silence is deafening. If bloodline legitimacy was everything, why would these families tolerate uncertainty unless the uncertainty itself served a purpose? Unless the origins of these women were deliberately obscured, this pattern repeats across Europe. In the 1700s, marriages consolidated power on a continental scale. We are told these unions were calculated to the finest degree. But the brides often appeared with minimal lineage documentation, married into the most scrutinized families on earth, and then their origins solidified into unquestioned historical fact. No one asked. No one challenged it. And that is precisely where the first cracks appear in the story we've been told. Once I noticed the gaps in maternal lines, I began examining how power itself transitioned between royal houses. This is where the Romanovs enter the picture. Official history tells us the Romanov dynasty descended cleanly from the ancient Rurik line, a neat continuation stretching back centuries. It's a comforting story, stable, legitimate, but genealogical stability leaves fingerprints. And when I followed the records closely, I found transitions that felt managed rather than organic. The documents exist, certainly. Marriage certificates, court announcements, birth records. But these records document events, not origins. They tell us that someone married, not who they truly descended from. And in the footnotes, quiet, academic whispers never expanded upon, I began to notice references to Tatar ancestry among several Russian noble families. Not Mongolian. Tatar. The word itself is revealing. Linguistically, culturally, historically, it sits dangerously close to a name that modern history avoids. Tartary. This is not conspiracy shouted from the rooftops. Its implication buried in margins. Mentioned, then abandoned. Acknowledged, then ignored. Looking westward, the same pattern appears. The British monarchy underwent a dramatic transformation in 1714 with the arrival of the House of Hanover. We're given a tidy explanation: Protestant succession, parliamentary approval, a legitimate claim through distant Stuart ancestry. All documented. All proper, but when you examine the German principalities these rulers emerged from, something strange becomes visible. Many of these territories had themselves undergone recent dynastic changes, new families, new names, new heraldry, often within 1 or 2 generations of supplying monarchs to Britain. Dynasties appeared just in time to be needed. At first, this could be dismissed as coincidence. Europe was turbulent. Borders shifted. Families rose and fell. But when the same pattern repeats across Russia, Britain, Austria, and beyond, coincidence becomes an increasingly fragile explanation. Perhaps I was seeing patterns where none existed. Perhaps this was simply the erosion of time. But then I stopped looking at documents and started looking at stone. Documents can be rewritten. Buildings are harder to erase. Instead of focusing on castles inherited from earlier eras, I examined palaces constructed or heavily modified during the consolidation of royal power in the 18th century. In St. Petersburg, the Winter Palace. In London, major expansions of Buckingham Palace. In Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. In Madrid, the Royal Palace rebuilt. After the conveniently timed fire of 1734, that destroyed the previous Habsburg. Residents, official history attributes their similarities to neoclassical revival or Baroque influence. Traveling architects. Shared tastes. Cultural trends, but style alone doesn't explain what I saw. These buildings don't just resemble each other aesthetically. They share technical features, proportion systems, construction methods, decorative mathematics, precise ratios governing space and scale. The same architectural language repeats across thousands of miles, across empires allegedly competing for dominance. Different architects are credited, yes. But when you trace where these architects trained, where they learned to build at such scale with such uniform precision, the trail goes cold. Not everywhere. Just at the critical transmission points, the timing is impossible to ignore. Many of these projects occurred within the same narrow window of time, the early to mid-1700s, the exact period when Tartary began disappearing. From maps and new dynasties were solidifying. Control, official explanations demand an extraordinary coincidence. Rival empires independently adopting identical mathematical systems to project power through architecture. Simultaneously, without shared institutional knowledge. Or were they not rivals at all? What if these royal houses were branches of a shared ancestral structure, building in a language that predated their official genealogies? A language that reflected a heritage no longer meant to be acknowledged. Words can lie. Maps are harder to manipulate retroactively. When I examined European maps from the 1600s and 1700s, French, Dutch, British, I found Tartary everywhere. Not a vague region, but an enormous territory stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific, from Siberia to the edges of China. These were not speculative maps. They were trade maps, military maps, tools merchants and generals depended on. They marked cities, trade routes, and most telling, royal courts, multiple royal courts across Tartarian territory. Then, over a remarkably short span of time, Tartary vanishes. The land doesn't disappear, it's redistributed. Russia in the west, Qing China in the east, Ottoman control elsewhere. But the people? The courts? The governance structures? Gone. Empires don't vanish silently. Rome left centuries of decline. Byzantium documented its fall in painful detail. Even the Mongol Empire's fragmentation is well recorded. Tartary leaves nothing. No treaties. No resistance movements. No refugee accounts. Into that silent step, new royal families with suspiciously recent genealogies, claiming territories once labeled Tartarian. The official explanation: that Tartary was merely a European catch-all term for unknown lands collapses under scrutiny. Cartographers precise enough to map coastlines and borders. didn't suddenly become careless over the largest landmass on Earth. Symbols reinforce the pattern. The double-headed eagle appears across the Holy Roman Empire, Russia, Byzantium, and German principalities. We're told it emerged independently, repeatedly. But symbols of this complexity don't arise by accident. They imply shared knowledge, shared origin. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Today, genealogy is no longer limited to paper. DNA testing can confirm or challenge claims once taken on faith. So a final question becomes unavoidable. Why has there never been a comprehensive genetic study of European royal families? Not targeted studies, not partial analyses. A complete mapping. These families obsess over heritage, legitimacy, and continuity. And yet, in the age of genetic certainty, they show remarkable disinterest in verification. Why? Ancient DNA research has already shown that supposedly pure populations were deeply mixed. Migration and interconnection shape humanity everywhere. So what might appear in royal bloodlines that contradict official genealogies? What Central Asian or Siberian markers might emerge where none are supposed to exist? The silence returns, fires conveniently destroyed archives. Palaces burned. Records vanished at critical moments. Reconstruction always favored the new order, the newly established bloodlines, the newly claimed territories. History, we're told, is what happened. But more often, it's what survived. What if Tartary wasn't a myth, but a civilization whose descendants rule under new names? What if royal families we consider separate are branches of a single ancestral tree? What if the architecture, the symbols, the maps, and the gaps all point to a story deliberately edited out? I don't claim answers, only questions that multiply the deeper you look, and once you see them, you can't unsee them.